Hi all, welcome again to our 7-day Holy Week Devotional with me, Desiree Louisa. We are still on day 3, but this is part 2. We last ended off in Matthew chapter 22 verses 1 to 14. We continue in part 2 with chapter 22 verses 15 to 46. When we last ended off day 3 part 1, we came to understand God's plan through the parable in Matthew chapter 22 1 to 14. We also came to the conclusion that Jesus undoubtedly and resolutely declared the authority of heaven as the ultimate authority over the earth. In other words, he was showing that earth was in subjection to heaven. Through this parable, he taught how all decisions about spiritual things and life are decided in heaven and was initiated to earth for their acceptance or approval. The benefit not just for heaven, but for earth's benefit too. He proved that if earth doesn't marry heaven, then it will be to earth's disadvantage. So, he has designed a way to get earth to marry heaven, and that is through the institution of marriage to the Son of Heaven, Jesus Christ, relationship with him that will allow heaven's will to be done on earth. Through the acceptance of Jesus Christ, we will receive salvation. Salvation is heaven's rod of acceptance. Heaven measures if we are marriage material by salvation. Salvation gives us our marriage attire. It dresses us in the attire to be married to Christ. Salvation cleans us up and prepares us in God's righteous garments. Garment of righteousness, which is the holy requirement to be accepted in this marriage. What cleanses and attires us is righteousness, the blood of Jesus. The blood of the Son of Heaven consummates the marriage between heaven and earth. It forms the union, the relationship between him and us. Remember, in the parable, the man who was cast out, he did not have on the wedding attire. It means he did not accept and receive Jesus Christ, Yeshua, as Messiah and Lord. Therefore, he lost his right to stand before the king. Hence, he was speechless. Jesus taught this exceptionally well to the people. He proved which authority overrode which authority, and to which one he was off. Now, as we move forward in Matthew chapter 22, verses 15 to 46, we are going to see Jesus being tempted by certain persons concerning this parable he just taught. In verses 15 and 16, it says, Then went the Pharisees and took counsel how they might entangle him in his talk. And they went out unto him, their disciples, with the Herodians, saying, Master, we know that thou art true, and teachest the way of God in truth. Neither carest thou for any man, for thou regardest not the person of men. Here we see the Pharisees taking counsel about how they can entangle Jesus' teaching. So they sent their followers and the Herodians to tempt him. First, let's know who these people are that came to challenge Jesus and what was their intention. The Pharisees. They were a prominent Jewish religious sect of Jesus' day. They believed in the oral Torah, which was given to Moses on Mount Sinai, and they believed in the written Torah. These are the books of Moses and the prophets. They believed in the resurrection of the dead. They embraced the belief of angels and spirits. The Herodians, they were a political party, supporters of the Herodian dynasty. They were Hellenistic Jews who spoke Greek and in some way adopted the Greek lifestyle. They were not about the Judaism way of life only, the religious life. They accepted the Roman rule because the Hellenistics were more open-minded. They worked along with the Pharisees to oppose Jesus. What was the importance of these two groups of people challenging him? The Pharisees were the ones who wanted to entangle him. But being a religious sect, they knew Jesus would rebuke them quickly with spiritual talks to which he has done before. So they used these Herodians, a political party, a people with a different worldview, in hopes of showing off Jesus from his stance with their foolish wisdom. They were coming to challenge him with rule and power in order to distract him. So in verse 17, they came to question him in such manner, using Caesar as their means of authority. Verse 17 says, "Tell us therefore, what thinkest thou? Is it lawful to give tribute unto Caesar or not?" Verse 18 to 21 says, "But Jesus perceived their wickedness and said, Why tempt ye me, ye hypocrites? Show me the tribute money. And they brought unto him a penny. And he said unto them, Whose is this image and superscription? They said unto him, Caesar's. Then said he unto them, Render therefore unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's, and unto God the things which are God's." What were they all about? And why did Jesus respond, "Render or pay or give unto Caesar the things which be of Caesar, and unto God the things that are God's"? What was Jesus implying by his response? Was he saying to balance? One must balance earthly responsibility with one's worship to God? Or was he implying to give unto the world its worldly things and give unto God godly things? Should they have dual personalities when it comes to paying tribute? Let's examine Jesus' response. Firstly, he calls them hypocrites. Then he says, "Show me the money to which you are making mention." Then he asks, whose image and superscription is on it? Then finally he says, well, pay or give it to him. But the response doesn't end there. He finds it fitting to end off his response with, "Give unto God the things that are God's." But why, Jesus? They did not ask you about God or even make mention about anything about this at all. Jesus, knowing though the real question, the underlying motive about their questioning, answered them this way. Jesus' last response did not flow together. He directly and indirectly answered them. He used Caesar to start off the response, but then to end off, he brings in God. In his response, though, there is a semicolon. The translator put that there to emphasize that Jesus' response connected two independently or contrasting topic or ideas, which means they did not mention God. But he saw fit to put God in the fabric of his answer because it relates to the underlying topic they really wanted to discuss. that they were not brave enough to confront him about? What were they really questioning him about? And what were they imposing? They were really trying to question Jesus about whose authority he was under. This was a question concerning the battle of authority. They were trying to impose carnal authority over the authority that Jesus operated by. This was no foolish question they posed to Jesus. They wanted to know if Jesus will downplay his heavenly authority for the authority of Caesar. Jesus' authority was spiritual, but Caesar's authority was carnal. Jesus knew there was no rivalry here. Carnal authority cannot override spiritual authority. After all, he just taught that through the parable. The things that are carnal are only temporal, but the things that are spiritual are eternal. Jesus knew Caesar only had authority because of God, because God decided. Therefore, Jesus understood their foolishness to tempt him into esteeming carnal authority as the higher authority than that of the authority to which he operated by, which was by the Spirit of God. So instead of him saying blatantly that Caesar's authority is no match for the authority of God, to which they never even mentioned, Jesus used the opportunity to put God in his rightful place. His response, therefore, was not a cowardice answer to run from their question, but rather it was a well-thought and decided statement to say, to each its own. In other words, if your authority is carnal, then you do that which suits your authority. But he attached the authority that comes from God in his response to imply that his authority is of God. So, therefore, he does the things of God. He implies to them that if your authority is Caesar, then you do that which is right unto Caesar. But my authority is of God, and therefore I do the things that pleases or is right to God. He shows the contrast of earthly authority compared to spiritual authority. By his response, he destroys their philosophy of Caesar being like God. You see, Augustus Caesar was the head of the Roman Empire. He was the first emperor of Rome. He ruled over Israel at this time, but he was not to take God's sovereign place. The only sovereign authority there must be God. So, was Jesus therefore saying, don't pay taxes to Caesar? No, that is not what he implied, because the authority of God never disqualifies earthly authority. So therefore, if Caesar, as the earthly ruler, required of you to pay taxes, then you need to acknowledge that and pay your taxes. But look closely. This was not their intention to discuss the subject of paying taxes. No. Remember, their intention was to entangle him in his talk. Entangle means to confuse. But to confuse him of what? They sought to confuse him of the authority to which he was from. Remember, Jesus at this time is coming closer and closer to fulfilling all the prophecies about the Messiah who was to come. So their intentions was to show him off, to confuse him of his authority, which will confuse him of his identity. But they failed again at their reproach, because Jesus ultimately declared to them, I know who I am, But if you don't know who you are, that is on you. They could not confuse Jesus. He stood his ground. Verse 22 says, when they had heard these words, they marveled and left him and went their way. So the Pharisees left Jesus and went their way. But in verse 23, the Sadducees came to him the same day. It looked like everyone was taking their opportunity to challenge him at this point. They, the Sadducees, were a Jewish religious and political sect or group in Jesus' day. They held positions in the priesthood of Judaism like the high priest. They were members of the Sanhedrin, the Jewish ruling council, which played a role in political and legal matters. So they had a big involvement in laws. They did not believe in the resurrection, which proves the Sadducees were immoral people. They tried to keep the Torah, but they were spiritually dead. They were no different spiritually to the Pharisees. The only difference were their beliefs to certain things. The Pharisees believed in the resurrection, but they, the Sadducees, did not believe in the resurrection. This Sadducees group came to Jesus on a question of resurrection, but they used a moral law from the Torah about carrying on legacy, as its example, which explains that if a man dies, his brother is to marry his wife to carry on the seed. In this case, the woman they were referring to married all 7 brothers. Their question was, therefore, verse 28, therefore, in the resurrection, whose wife shall she be of the 7? For they all had her. Jesus answered and said unto them, ye do err, not knowing the scriptures, nor the power of God. For in the resurrection they neither marry, nor are given in marriage, but are as the angels of God in heaven. But as touching the resurrection of the dead, have you not read that which was spoken unto you by God, saying, I am the God of Abraham, and the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob? God is not the God of the dead, but of the living. He declared boldly to them their state, that they were carnally minded. They did not understand the scriptures, that it was spiritual and were to be known by the Spirit. He then explained to them that the resurrection was a spiritual act that redeems one from the convicts of the flesh. Because the resurrection can only occur to the person who is living by faith unto God. He mentions their patriarchs, Father Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and shows God's boast in them as men of faith, alive unto God. God, being the God of the living, means spiritually alive. Spiritual Israel. Israel that was children of God by faith in him. Verse 33 says, and when the multitude heard this, they were astonished at his doctrine. In verses 34 to 46, we read that the Pharisees came back to challenge him again after they saw how he silenced the Sadducees. Verse 34 says, but when the Pharisees had heard that he had put the Sadducees to silence, they were gathered together. Then one of them, which was a lawyer, asked him a question, tempting him and saying, Master, which is the great commandment in the law? Jesus said unto him, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. This is the first and great commandment, and the second is like unto it. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. Jesus answered perfectly that the great commandment is to love God with everything and to love others as you love yourself. He stated that on this command, God sent his law and prophets to them. As other Pharisees gathered, in verse 41, it says, while the Pharisees were gathering together, Jesus asked them. Jesus knew that they were coming with their motives of who he were. Remember, they just left him a while ago with the same foolish temptations. So he decided to end this questioning once and for all. So he asked them in verses 42 to 45, saying, what think ye of Christ? Whose son is he? They say unto him, the son of David. He said unto them, how then doeth David in spirit call him Lord, saying, the Lord said unto my Lord, sit thou on my right hand, till I make thine enemies thy footstool. If David then call him Lord, how is he his son? With this question, Jesus killed their misunderstanding of who Messiah, which is Christ, the Anointed One, is. He destroyed their wrong belief that the Messiah was to come from an earthly authority. He was proving that Messiah was Lord, that he would come from above, that David, by the revelation of the Spirit of God, understood this and called him Lord. Jesus killed every idea through this question that they would have about the Messiah being ordained by man, rather than ordained and came from God himself. By this discussion he has with them, it dismantles their philosophy and thinking and discourage their efforts to ask what they were not brave enough to ask. Jesus using this setup to validate to them once and for all who he was, where he was sent from, and what he came to do. Verse 46 says, after that, no man was able to answer him a word, neither does any from that day forth ask him any more questions. I hope you enjoyed part 2, and I pray and hope that it brought some clarity to the temptations that Jesus faced on that day in the temple. See you for part 3. Bye.